Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where it might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the Kevin Michael Grace Show, or the KMG Show. Once again, forgot the name of my own live stream. That's a good start, isn't it? I thought I would start today with something a little more theoretical, a framework for the crisis that we call him philosopher. He was a chemist, economist, and other things. His name was Hungarian. His name was Michael Polanyi, and he lived from 1891 to 1976. And he came up with a concept that he called a moral inversion. And what moral inversion is that everything that was bad is good, that everything that was beautiful is ugly, and vice versa. Up is down, down is up, black is white. Briefly from a paper called Confronting the Minotaur, Moral Inversion, and Polanyi's Moral Philosophy. To call Polanyi preeminently a moral philosopher seems initially to spur in the Aristotelian tradition, who anticipated the turn in recent years away from the modern ethics of rules to the classical ethics of virtue. One can find strands in Polanyi's work that prefigures certain much acclaimed arguments advanced by Alistair McIntyre, whose book After Virtue I discussed in the book club a few weeks ago. A case in broadly understood as the process by which the fusion of scientific skepticism with utopian social aspirations, that is to say what he called extreme critical lucidity with intense moral conscience, produces the dystopia of moral and political nihilism out of which arise and which material welfare is embraced as the supreme social good. The exposure and critique of moral inversion is a project to which Polanyi reverts repeatedly between 1946 and 1975, and it can be fairly said that diagnosing this pathology, analyzing its causes, and devising a remedy constitute the social objective to which his philosophical work is ordered. Now, let's read from another description of this. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my trackball here. It has decided to go odd on me. I can't get the pointer to go where I want it to go, and this is at the worst possible time. Would it not be? Almost there. There we go. Here's a piece that appeared at the website of Chris Scruggs, Moral Inversion and America Today. He writes, last week I sketched out some main points of Michael Polanyi's Science, Faith, and Society. One aspect of his thought I neglected was his notion of moral inversion. And this was written in June 2020 with reference to recent events. This past week, Americans have seen the impact of the way in which the materialistic power orientation of our society causes a moral inversion in many people, in which terrible acts of violence seem justified to a rootless moral conscience. As last week progressed, we saw nationwide riots causing unbelievable damage based on moral outrage concerning the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. In the mind of the rioters and those who have supplied the funds and encouragement for the riots, they are justified as a response to perceived American racism. In his writing, Polanyi outlines a process he terms moral inversion, which he believes is a common characteristic of totalitarian regimes on the right and the left. Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, and Communist China were all powered by an extreme moral energy unconnected with any form of traditional morality. Moral inversion, Polanyi believes, is the demonic power behind dehumanizing and violently social movements and the oppressive governments they create. For all the destruction they create, the leaders of these movements understood themselves, I'll start that again. For all the destruction they create, the leaders of these movements, they understood themselves utopian visions of the common good. Moral inversion is not limited to totalitarian regimes. What is moral inversion? Polanyi believes that the strong demand for moral perfection, characteristic of Christianity, when combined with the materialist reductionism of modern thought that ends in an objective moral nihilism, results in reason and morality that works in a destructive way. In his book, Logic of Liberty, Polanyi describes the phenomenon, speaking of Russian Marxists and German Nazis, as follows, quote, "In such men, the traditional forms for holding moral ideals had been shattered and the moral passions diverted into the only channels which a strictly mechanistic conception of man and society left open to them. We may call this the process of moral inversion. The morally inverted person has not merely performed a philosophic substitution of moral aims by material purposes, but is acting with the whole force of his homeless moral passions within a purely materialistic framework of purposes." Scruggs continues, "Human beings are by nature motivated by moral passions. When by education or training they are denied an intellectual ground for their moral passions, these passions, like a river that is run out of its banks, flow in an uncontrolled flood in whatever channel lies conveniently at hand. In modern materialistic societies, that channel has been revolutionary action designed to create a new society along strictly materialistic notions. Communism or some form of national socialism has been the preferred channel. The disasters of the 21st century have been powered by a moral energy resulting from this rechanneling of moral passions in a destructive way. There is no critique of Christianity more common than the complaint that Christians are hypocrites. That is to say, the Christians do not live up to the high moral ideals of Christ, which they profess to admire. This is, of course, true. One only needs to read the Beatitudes to see that Christ upholds a moral standard to which we may aspire, but will not ever obtain. The perfectionist impulse of Christian faith is responsible for a great deal of the moral progress of Western civilization. Nevertheless, among those afflicted with a loss of faith or no faith in moral ideals at all, this inability of Christians to achieve their ideals can become a breeding ground for moral inversion powered by a feeling that traditional morality is hypocritical. This is made more dangerous by the postmodern charge that all moral claims are merely bids for power. With the Enlightenment and its exaltation of critical reason, Christian faith and morals were placed under the dissolving power of reductionist critical thinking. The materialism of the modern world, with its reduction of all reality to material particles and forces acting upon that reality, eventually led to the critique of Nietzsche that God, spirit, was an illusion, that Christianity was a slave religion, and that the will to power was the final characteristic of all sound moral reasoning. This leads directly to the terrible irrational immorality of contemporary politics, where winning is everything, and any action, however immoral, is justified if it is in the furtherance of a moral idea held by a particular group. A society characterized by moral inversion is unstable. It should be obvious that the views of Antifa, the violent looters in the meeting egging them on, are incompatible with the freedoms they purport to be advancing. A society built on terror will simply be a terror to everyone, good, bad, rich, poor, powerful, and powerless. I was able to travel in Russia just after the fall of communism. Communism was physically, morally, and spiritually impoverishing to everyone. What we see playing out on the streets of our cities in America is exactly the phenomena that led to millions of deaths under Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and Pol Pot, all of whom played upon the moral sentiments of their people and created unmitigated horror and suffering for all. The moral outrage of the left and the constant charge of Nazism against those who resist them betrays the deranged nature of their thinking. As I reminded a friend this week, from the beginning of the Trump inauguration, the violence, the burning of cars in Washington, the deceitful bringing of charges that were privately known to be untrue against the president and his administration, the fiasco of the impeachment, the dishonesty of the Justice Department and other agencies, the conniving of the last administration instead of organizing a peaceful and honest transfer of power, the refusal of college campuses to allow Christian and conservative thinkers to speak, even the trivial fact that my neighbor can safely wear her Biden button in public, but other friends are in physical danger if they wear a MAGA hat, are telling. These are not the acts of people who love our country and are seeking to maintain its institutions. They are the actions of a twisted and inverted morality, lacking in a moral ground and acting with an unhinged passion. They are the actions of new brown shirts and their morally bankrupt leadership. To give just one example of moral inversion, let's take homosexuality. Now, homosexuals were criminalized in the West, in Canada until 1969, in Britain until roughly the same time, throughout the United States, even later than that. Strangely enough, this is one of my laws, the laws of the anomalous response, that it was the rise of AIDS, which was thought to be a threat to the whole of mankind, which led to the triumph of the gay agenda. It's not simply that it is all demanded of us, that we not only tolerate, but praise, acclaim homosexuality and homosexuals, but we see concomitantly that heterosexuality is demonized. How is it demonized? People who have children are wicked. They're wicked. They're bringing children into a world that cannot accommodate them. They are killing the earth. Let us say procreation is killing the earth. That particularly amongst white people, that white people should not be having children. White people who have children are wicked, unless, of course, they're rich and famous. The rules are different for those people. What about homosexuals who have children? Well, homosexuals are getting their children from heterosexuals because, of course, homosexuals, it is not possible for them to create their own children because it requires a man and a woman to do so. Dr. Bruce Charlton has written, been influenced by Paul Yanyi. He writes, the moral inversion of PC seems to spring from its generally rebellious adolescent mindset. Adolescents are naturally the worst behaved group in society. In terms of the psychology of personality across lifespan, it's during adolescence that a person will on average reach their high eroticism, impulsiveness, and extroversion. Their lowest levels of empathizing, agreeableness, and aggression levels peak around the mid-teens. The youth culture, driven by pride, is therefore evolving new morality, which makes adolescents the best people instead of the worst. The teenager as moral exemplar, the adolescent, impatient, full of angst, with multiple sensitivities, with easily bruised ego, lonely yet yearning for love, as the moral hero and compass for the rest of society. Secular modernity, with its psychological neoteny, its essential adolescence, its suspended immaturity, therefore performs a moral inversion which relabels its faults as virtues and reframes morality as primarily a matter of honesty. Honesty means living by chosen standards. The square adult world is accused of hypocrisy, of failing to live up to the high standards it advocates, and this sin is seen as invalidating all else. Adolescent honesty is not therefore about telling the truth, but about advocating very low standards of behavior, then exceeding them. Only adolescents, so the story goes, are really moral, because only they adopt an honestly low standard of behavior, which they and everyone else can truly live up to, can even exceed, and exceed gratuitously as a pure act of surplus goodness, not underpinned by religious or otherworldly rewards or sanctions. This is perhaps the essence of moral inversion in modernity. You see, I mentioned before beauty. Let's look at the fashion world. The fashion world is exceedingly influential. That we see grossly fat women hailed as beauties, as sex symbols even. We see disfigured people like the model Winnie Harlow being hailed as great beauties and as sex symbols. We see the continuing effort to Lena Dunham. Supposedly she is attractive. She is not attractive, not even close to being attractive, but there is so much that is invested in this. And it seems to be, well, at first glance, it seems to be pure perversity. But obviously, there is more. There is more going on here. Because it's not pure perversity. It is this moral inversion that we are talking about. No question about it. As to why this is happening now, well, I suppose it is simply the result of trends which have been going on. Perhaps the culmination of a trend which has been going on for decades. Could be the end. You know, systems continue as they stop, as Herbert Stein once famously said. And I wanted to mention something that I had written years ago with regard to, this is the time of the legalization of gay marriage. I wrote, after the French Revolution had nationalized marriage and unfettered divorce, Walter Scott thundered, if fiends had set out to discover the most efficient way of destroying whatever is venerable, graceful, or permanent in domestic life, they could not have invented a more effectual plan than the degradation of marriage into a state of mere occasional cohabitation or licensed concubinage, unquote. It took most of 2 centuries to develop, but licensed concubinage is what marriage has devolved into. Sterile, brief, incompanion unions disconnected from the past and uninterested in the future. Now homosexuals who think in similar terms want to be licensed too. Well, why not? In his 1930 encyclical Casti Connubii, Christian Marriage, Pope Pius XI lamented the many unmindful people totally ignorant of the sanctity of marriage, who impudently deny it, who even allow themselves to be led of the principles of a modern and perverse ethical doctrine to repudiate it with scorn. These pernicious errors and degraded morals have begun to spread even among the faithful. Soon enough, they would spread even among the hierarchy, as millions of Western Catholic divorcees got what Henry VIII could not. Pius XI quoted Leo XIII on the purpose of marriage, the chief cause of wedlock, established in the beginning by God's authority, increase and multiply. Very few Catholics and almost no one else would today assent to that proposition. Lash was not a Catholic or even a believer, but he understood that the family's proper purpose is not providing workers for the managerial state. He wrote, quote, the history of modern society is the assumption of social control over activities once left to individuals or their families. During the first stage of the Industrial Revolution, capitalists took production out of the household and collectivized it under their own supervision in the factory. Then they proceeded to appropriate the workers' skills and technical knowledge by means of scientific management and to bring these skills together under managerial direction. Finally, they extended their control over the workers' private life as well, as doctors, psychiatrists, teachers, child guidance experts, officers of the juvenile courts, and other specialists began to supervise child rearing, formerly the business of the family, unquote. Lash was among the first to understand the symbiotic relationship of capitalism and feminism. Feminists want women out of the house because they want to free them. Capitalists want them out because they lower wages. Feminists fought the traditional family because it was patriarchal. Capitalists fought it because it was not prepared to forsake its neighborhoods and communities for higher wages. The destruction of the traditional family was long the goal of the therapeutic professions. The cleverer among them realized, however, that marriage could be emptied of meaning over time. The clever Swedes devised companionate marriage as a substitute. The companionate marriage, which comprises the vast majority of unions in the West, is based on romantic love, friendship, sexual attraction, or common interests. The purpose of the union is the individual happiness of each man and woman, or soon enough, man and man, or woman and woman. It is strictly nuclear. Children can be added if desired. One is not obliged to raise them. Nevertheless, couples prefer contraception and abortion instead. Romantic love ends, sexual attraction fades, and friendship and common interests are weak bonds in crisis. So companionate marriage may be dissolved as often as necessary. The welfare state succors single moms and chivies deadbeat dads. Social commentator Edward Luttwak noted several years ago that the West is engaged in an experiment unprecedented in human history, people without families. In 1977, Christopher Lash found the early evidence discouraging. Quote, it is precisely the separation of love and discipline associated with communal forms of child rearing that encourages the development of personality traits more compatible with totalitarian regimes than with democracy. A strong attachment to the peer group, a marked fear of being alone, more or less complete alienation from the past, a strong concern with personal authenticity in relations with others, unmediated by conventional forms of politeness or even by respect for the other person's individuality, and a lack of introspection and of a highly developed inner life. If we look at the people out on the streets in America, this is exactly what we find. mostly millennials and some younger people. Well, I'll just repeat what Lash found. A strong attachment to the peer group, a marked fear of being alone, more or less complete alienation from the past, a strong concern with personal authenticity in relation with others, unmediated by conventional forms of politeness, or even by respect for the other person's individuality and lack of introspection and of a highly developed inner life. Now, Lash wrote this in 1977, so it's not what we are seeing now should be a surprise. But our elite decided that everything that we knew to be true about the family was going to be destroyed. It was going to be destroyed deliberately in the name of freedom, in the name of license. And I don't know, I suppose it's a bit late in the day for liberals who have encouraged all of this for decades to start whining about how badly it has. Der Yeomans found today Sir John Gielgud wrote the script of a gay porn film, Everyone Must Feel My Pain. Is this a story? Just a rumor. Chad Hudson says, hello, Kevin and chat. Chad Hudson's our valiant moderator. Hello, Chad. On a daily basis, that, see, the dead have no privacy and one can think about them because you're not going to get sued. John has a super choppy connection. You may want to go audio only if you can. KMG uses a lot less bandwidth. I think the problem is that the Wi-Fi in this hotel is not very good. Not as good as the Wi-Fi that I have had at other hotels. I do apologize, and I'll see. Interesting, morality is how power is transferred, says Dionysius. That. There's really nothing I can do over Christian years. I don't know, isn't it there already? It's certainly there and been dominated by homosexuals and their allies for decades now. Paul Rosine says there have been over 50 carjackings per snatching. The police have completely stood down. Manfred von Thistlebaum says Gielgud was in the film Caligula, so it doesn't surprise me. I can tell you a little bit about the movie Caligula. The Caligula has a lot of famous people in it. Helen Mirren is in it. Peter O'Toole in it. A whole bunch of top drawer actors and actresses. And then form a switcheroo. After the pros had done their acting, he brought in a bunch of penthouse pets and the like and filmed these explicit sex scenes and put them in the film, much to the horror of the respectable actors who were in it. Claire Caw says, who is Kevin sharing a room with? No one. There are 2 king-size beds in this room. That was the room that was available. I guess that's how it works. Metal Mike says, do you agree that the managerial elite are the problem? Well, they're part of the problem. They're part of the problem. But I don't know, they pretty much do what they're told, you know. They pretty much do what they're told. Someone makes a comment of Malcolm McDowell. Yes, Malcolm McDowell was in it. Helen Mirren was a nice, yes, she was a very attractive young woman, I must say. Yeah, let's talk about the Democratic Party platform, if I can open this thing. This is absolutely infuriating. Here we go. This is from John Nolte. The Democratic National Committee draft platform for its 2020 convention mentions whites a total of 15 times, each of them within a damning context, a detail first noticed by the Washington Examiner's Paul Bedard. In more than 80 pages in the draft platform published by Politico, whites are mentioned 15 times, all critical, including 3 references to white supremacy or supremacists and 1 to white nationalists. In most mentions, the reference is to how whites are better off at the expense of others, and the promise often is to close the gap between minorities and whites, though no solutions are offered. Well, this is obviously absurd, because if that were the case, then Africans in Africa would be at the top of the pyramid. They would have the highest living standards in the world. The fact is that black people do better when they're close to white people, which is why whites flee to the suburbs, and then they fled to the exurbs, and the blacks followed them. But no, the Democratic Party has become the majority minority party, the coalition of the minorities, and black people are not well regarded there, as to why the Democrats are nominating an antediluvian white person for president. Apparently he was Barack Obama's vice president. What he has been, he is just the proximity apparently has made him great, or at least acceptable. I mentioned this war against classical music, and I'm going to mention it again because it is part of the moral inversion. Yes, Nebel Maysoud, or however it's pronounced, is an award-winning, what awards, queer Lebanese Druze composer based in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and he has penned an essay called "It's Time to Let Classical Music Die." Classical music is really a museum piece now. It became taken over by a process, and you see this, I suppose, with Schoenberg's dodecaphonic or 12-tone system. I have a great deal of fondness for Arnold Schoenberg, but he had this German obsession with process. And after the Second World War, classical music was taken over by the Academy, that you had professors of music, and many composers were professors. This is the so-called new music, which you still hear of. Nobody listened to it then. No one listens to it now. All of these serialist or quasi-serialist efforts are long forgotten. And such was their hold over classical music that pretty much all the composers, including Stravinsky, were bullied into writing 12-tone works. Composers like Samuel Barber, who stood out against this, were essentially driven out of music, and it wasn't until the film Platoon that there began to be a Samuel Barber revival, which is still going on. He was a very good composer. There was a revolt of the minimalists against the academicians and the serialists in the 1970s. Philip Glass, John Adams, Steve Reich, Arvo Pärt, and the like. And some of their works have become genuinely popular, but it just seems to be taken for granted that classical music is dead, that it is an exhibit in a museum. William Briggs wrote about this on July 2nd, 2019, Classical Music versus Music of Color. He doesn't like classical music that would be Nebel Maysoud because it's white, which it isn't white, that is. It started that way. The vast majority of notable composers are white, but if we're going to go by numbers, classical music is now more East Asian than white. Incidentally, queer, says the thesaurus, is abnormal. Maysoud says, my fellow musicians of color, it's time to accept that we're in an abusive relationship with classical music. It's not clear what color he thinks he is, but he looks white. He wrote, it's not about culture, it's about whiteness. It's a combination of European traditions which serve the specious belief that whiteness has a culture, one that is superior to all others. Its main purpose is to be a cultural anchor for the myth of white supremacy. In that regard, people of color can never truly be pioneers of Western classical music. I don't know how that would be possible to be a pioneer of Western classical music, since the modern canon, what does that start with? Bach, with Monteverdi, say? I mean, that was hundreds of years ago. The best we can be are exotic guests entertainment for the white audiences, an example of how Western classical music is more elite than the cultures of people of color. What are we talking about by culture here? DJ Khaled, who's in a Geico commercial now. This paragraph is what is known as gibberish among reality researchers, but it is pleasant-sounding gibberish. The winds of culture are now blowing anti-white. Hence, our critic Mesau's repeated emphasis in his article about enjoying perverted sex, which to him means less white. I don't think that black people give much of a thought, if any, to classical music, and simply never have. It's, I don't know, it's something like lawn bowling. It's something that different people, 2 weeks ago, the Washington Post coordinated that affirmative action to the hiring of symphonic musicians and those in opera companies. And I'm sure they will have their way. But as I pointed out at the time, there are literally tens of thousands of recordings, LPs, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays of the classical orchestras before they were wrecked, of opera companies before they were wrecked. And so let them go ahead. Let them go ahead and do this. It's not going to have the effect that they intend, because this will be seen as not the real thing. Be seen as something different. Oh, let's talk. I was talking to you, but I watched their second and third games against the Tampa Bay Rays in their hideous concrete monstrosity in St. Petersburg. Why they're called Tampa Bay is something of a mystery to me. Why aren't they called the St. Petersburg Petes? Apparently that was the name of a baseball team there. The Jays traditionally do poorly against the Rays, even when the Rays were not a good team. And yesterday's game was something of an atrocity, with the Jays blowing leads, but in the ninth inning. And very bad managing from Charlie Montoya, and yeah, their first baseman, Junior. I noted last year that guy had better lose 50, 60 pounds soon, or he's going to have 2 hip replacements by the time that he's 40. And he runs like a 40-year-old. He runs like a fat 40-year-old. They couldn't get to first base in time for a crucial out in yesterday's game. That would be Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Justin Verlander gave a speech on racial justice. I think for myself personally, there needs to be change in our culture. It's pretty compelling from Justin Verlander. I noted at the time, this is the sort of video a man makes after he's had wires from a car battery attached to his genitals for several hours. And then Justin was struck by the curse of Black Lives Matter. In a major blow to the Houston Astros' 2020 hopes, ace Justin Verlander has a forearm strain and will be shut down for a couple of weeks, according to manager Dusty Baker. Dusty Baker still has a job in Major League Baseball? Amazing. I guess no one's going to fire him now, not this year. He's shut down for a couple of weeks and will reevaluate at that time. That's all I can tell you. Baker said Verlander had told the team his arm was tender during Friday's start and that the 37-year-old right-hander had undergone an MRI on Saturday. It was early announced, yes, he tweeted yesterday, the report that I'm currently missing the rest of the season is not accurate. There is forearm strain. I'm hopeful that with some rest it will heal and I'll be able to return soon. Thank you all for the well wishes. Well, it's a commonplace in baseball that with pitchers, especially these days, out for a week on the disabled list, another week, and then shut down for the season. I don't know whether that's going to happen with Verlander, but given the craven nature of the video he made, he richly deserves it. I don't know, there seems to be some question of whether this baseball season is going to be, whether they're going to pack it in. Let's see, the Miami Marlins won't play their scheduled game against the Baltimore Orioles on Monday night. The game has been canceled. The club has remained in Philadelphia after this weekend's 3-game series. After a Sunday report of 4 positive tests, 8 more players and 2 coaches have tested positive for the coronavirus, according to a report that brings the total of positives for 14 in recent days, given that these are typically, except for Vladdy Guerrero Jr., men in superb physical condition. COVID-19 is not a threat to them, but they are sore, fearful of it. Let's see, this is from CBS Sports. Yankees-Phillies game postponed after Marlins COVID-19 outbreak at Citizens Bank Park. But this absurd situation where the Toronto Blue Jays are not allowed to play at home at the Rogers Centre. And their minor league, their AAA stadium in Buffalo, is not going to be ready for, 3 weeks, a month, something like that. So they are playing home games in other people's stadia, which is really a pathetic state of affairs. You talked about peer group pressure. Christopher Lash was writing about this. There is a publication called Deadspin, and if you're a sports fan and you're also a bug man, this is the sports site for you. Jesse Spector filed a piece on Friday because he was very upset about one player on the San Francisco Giants who would not cave in to peer pressure. He wrote, the San Francisco Giants have been lacking a complete moron in their bullpen since they let wall-punching, brawl-starting, even had Fox News wondering if he was racist, imbecile Hunter Strickland go after the 2018 season. Sam Coonrod, the job is yours. Before Thursday night's opening games of Major League Baseball's shortened season, every player on the Yankees and Nationals and every player on the Giants and Dodgers held a ribbon and took a knee for a moment of staged solidarity to acknowledge that acknowledging Black Lives Matter is an important thing to do to keep up appearances right now. So he begins with accusing them of hypocrisy. If you are going to grovel and be accused of hypocrisy and cynicism, then don't grovel, because you're not going to get anything. Major League Baseball still embraces Donald Trump. Boo! And still has widespread issues with racism. Does it now? Does it now? Why don't you give some? This was just a moment to say, hey, the police murdering people is not okay. Yes, I'm a grown man with a beard, and I speak like I'm a 14-year-old girl, because that's the way woke people speak. Coonrad quite literally could not get down with that. Quote, I'm a Christian, so I just believe that I can't kneel before anything besides God. How about that? The overwhelming majority of Major League Baseball players are Christians, but Coonrad, of course, means more when he says, I'm a Christian. Oh, what does he mean? He means it in the way that Anthony Rendon did last year when he said, I want to be known as a Christian baseball player, and I'm still trying to grow into that, but in the end, I want to be more Christian than baseball player. How about that? I just can't get on board with a couple things I've read about Black Lives Matter, how they lean towards Marxism, and they said some negative things about the nuclear family. I just can't get on board with that. You can probably guess what Coonrod is doing his research. Please do tell. But Black Lives Matter, especially as endorsed by Major League Baseball, is not about Marxism in the slightest. You're a liar and a creep, Jesse Spector, because there are records about this. Things have been said. Things have been written. They're trying to erase them, but too late for that. Do you really think Major League Baseball would be on board with if enough pressure were put on it? Because these people are cowards. No, it's about saying that black people shouldn't be murdered by the police. Oh, that's why the police have to be dismantled? Wouldn't it be easier just to, give orders, no more murder? Coonrad was asked to take a knee and basically say innocent people shouldn't get killed and racism is generally bad. What an absolute creep. What an absolute creep. But I'm hoping that Deadspin, isn't this part of the Gawker Empire, formerly of the Gawker Empire? Jim Kunstler's column today is called The Insane Leading the Blind. On our way to becoming a nation of hobos, The Democratic Party's Antifa shock troops brought out the lethal weapons this weekend, hoping to provoke a Kent State 2.0 type bloodbath that would clinch the election for the mummified remains of Joe Biden, currently reposing in his basement sepulcher. How'd that work out? In Louisville Saturday, just before lunchtime, and some profanity here, I'm just quoting, the self-styled Not Fucking Around Coalition, NFAC, that's actually what they're called, was mustering for action and inspecting firearms, according to NFAC Commandante Grandmaster J, and indeed that's what he calls himself, when one of said weapons accidentally discharged and mowed down 3 NFAC warriors, nicely demonstrating the hazards of fucking around with loaded weapons. In Austin Saturday night, one feckless BLM mob marcher by the name of Garrett Foster brought his AK-47 to the street party. When he pointed it at a motorist trapped by the crowd, he got blown away to that great struggle session in the sky. The surprise of his life, I'm sure. He gave an interview, which you can easily find on YouTube, where he said that he wasn't worried about carrying this thing around because he said that the people who oppose Antifa are pussies and would do nothing about it. Famous last words. And apparently there is much wailing and gnashing of teeth over this young idiot's death, especially since it was revealed that he was engaged to a black woman. Not any black woman, a quadriplegic black woman. That is a commitment. In Portland, Oregon, police found a bag of loaded rifle magazines and Molotov cocktails in the nearby park that serves as the rioters' marshalling yard. Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler did not attend the evening's frolics at the sore beset federal courthouse, having successfully subjected himself to ritual humiliation himself a few nights earlier. After midnight Sunday, police declared the Antifa actions a riot and made a few arrests. Up Seattle way, a federal judge struck down the city council's order against police using tear gas and pepper spray on rioters just in time for another weekend full of rioting. Police Chief Carmen Best declared, in the spirit of offering trust and full transparency, I want to advise you that SPD officers will be carrying pepper after Antifas smashed the windows of ground floor businesses, set fire to a constructor, were arrested on rioting, assault, and other charges, while 21 SPD officers were injured. I should note that Carmen Best, Seattle Police Chief, sent out a tweet, was a document attached to it, essentially saying that Seattle police are no longer going to enforce the law with regard to the destruction of property. How about that? You're on your own, Seattleites. Down in LA, Antifas broke into the Federal Bureau of Prisons Detention Center in Richmond, Virginia. Rioters set fire to a city dump truck used as a barrier to protect a police station. So it goes in the insurrection summer of 2020. The nation's attention is averted from the real action taking place as the economy continues to implode and the US dollar slides on the Forex market, meaning that not only is business failing everywhere and livelihoods extinguished, but the medium of exchange that represents all transactions by any remaining business is accelerating its decline toward the target value 0. This is unfortunately what comes of the fiscal profligacy prompted by the coronavirus crisis, with the Senate poised to introduce another $1 trillion in an emergency assistance spending bill that will reimburse 70% of unemployed workers' lost wages. Over on the House side, Speaker Nancy Pelosi upped the ante to $3 trillion in emergency spending designed to crater the dollar even faster and theoretically assure a Democratic Party victory on November 3rd to govern the smoldering cinder that will be left of the USA. The counterforce to that lethal inflation is the choking off of capital flows from the tens of millions of mortgages, car loans, and myriad other obligations that can't possibly be paid in August, September, and October. These tributaries flow into the larger rivers of capital, and when they dry up, the entire global banking order may keel over. With those fabled financial weapons of mass destruction, the derivatives triggering an orgy of counterparty insolvency. When capital stops flowing, you see money doesn't just sit there, it vanishes. The question is, can it disappear faster than fiscal policy gone wild can summon fresh money into existence? I guess we'll find out. The world has gone broke before, the Dark Ages, the Plague Years, the 30 Years' War, the Great Depression, but never broke like this or this badly or had so many people in it who were going to suffer from being broke. The Antifas on the streets of Portland, Seattle, and elsewhere probably don't have collateralized loan obligations and other financial esoterica on their minds, but these things lurk somewhere in the collective subconscious behind the nihilism they've fallen into these brutal dog days of summer as the insane lead the blind. I have asked in the past, when I used to write about financial matters, I'd say, why can't derivatives simply be canceled? Why can't, say, government simply ban them? Well, no, that would be impossible because, well, why not? Again, why not? It was famously said by a Supreme Court justice that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Okay, similarly, derivatives and other such instruments, they're not supposed to be suicide pacts, but as we learned in 2007 and 2008, they came very close to being just that. I don't see what purpose they serve except to line the pockets of criminal companies. Let's see, Fox News has a roundup of the insurrection summer, but there was a rather sad article indicating a narrative shift from the media that, I don't know, situation in Portland, it's not looking so great for the left anymore. So maybe it's gotten out of control. The wrong people are in charge. That seems to be the new line. From Black Lives to white spectacle, Portland protests have lost focus, civil rights leaders say. The focus has been moved from where it is supposed to be and made to be a spectacle, a debacle, said the president of the Portland NAACP. Well, it was always a spectacle. What does burning down a Wendy's accomplish? Exactly. Standing in front of a large banner bearing an image of Representative John Lewis, the black civil rights icon who died last week, the Reverend E.D. Mondania, president of the Portland branch of the NAACP, told protesters the focus has moved. 400 years we have struggled as black people in this nation. We have been made to be the last that were informed, but the first that were affected. That's pretty gnomic. I have no idea what that means. And again, these people like Joy Reid carrying on about this and Colin Kaepernick, they are not descendants of slaves. How are they allowed to act as if they are? Would you describe this as unearned valor or something close to it? Of course, valor is not exactly the same thing as many generations ago. My people were oppressed, but that's what counts for valor. These days, throughout the week, protesters have argued among themselves. Really? I didn't see that. Something. Some have called for nonviolent action. George Floyd. Still has to remind us about George Floyd. I think everyone knows who George Floyd is. Lost in the shuffle were the millions of black lives suffering systemic racism and injustice, said Lakayana Drury, executive director of Word is Bond, a Portland-based nonprofit. Nonprofit, eh? I'm sure it's profitable enough for the likes of Lakayana Drury. I want us to remember why we're here, she told protesters Thursday. What's happening downtown is not a black issue. This is a battle between two white supremacy entities, the Trump administration and the local city himself. He is part of the white supremacist entity of the city of Portland. Yeah, and here we, which is significant, in the majority white city, boo, black people comprise just 6% of the population. Many of those residents live far from the downtown area where thousands of demonstrators have descended every night for almost 2 months. They live down on the flats, the river flats. You want to live up in the hills. There's a general rule. You want to be up in the hills and not in the flats. The black issues exist very far from here. He said. Oh, I'm sorry. I misgendered Lackawanna Drury. I just assumed that must be a woman's name. But live and learn. It's in the classrooms where we have black students in 8th grade who are not at an 8th grade reading level. Whose fault is that? That's what we should be marching for. The Portland NAACP has repeatedly denounced the actions of federal forces in Portland, but has also criticized mostly white anarchists. Okay, so why don't you have your own riot then? See, this is what the state that white people are in. Damned if you do and damned if you don't. Once the fence that's around the federal courthouse is breached, the federal officers come out. They then throw tear gas into the crowd and use projectiles. No one standing near the scene is spared, not even Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler. Images of the mostly white wall of moms who were not moms. The PDX dad pod, that was an unfortunate coinage. And aggressive protesters have dominated much of the news coverage. Last week, a photo went viral showing a standoff between law enforcement and a naked white woman, later dubbed Naked Athena. Well, that suggests that she was a thing of beauty. I have not seen the evidence, but I remain doubtful. You see, if white people are seen to be doing something bad, they always get mentioned as white. If people do bad things and they are black, their skin color is limbed. In an op-ed published in the Washington Post, Mondagne denounced what he called the white spectacle. Unfortunately, spectacle is now the best way to describe Portland's protests, vandalizing government buildings and hurling projectiles at law enforcement draw attention. But how do these actions stop police from killing black people? What are Antifa and other leftist agitators achieving for the cause of black equality? And here we get into low comedy. Reginald Richardson Jr., pastor of Your Bible Speaks, a Seventh-day Adventist church, who describes himself as nonviolent, encourages white allies to act as shields for black people. Quote, black men and women will go to jail at a higher rate than our white brothers and sisters. It's time for our white brothers and sisters to stand up and be that barrier. Okay. You first. You first. Throw your bodies into the machine. Isn't that the message? The old communist message? Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. I get the impression that the reason that these Portland civil rights leaders, and why do we even use this phrase civil rights leaders, seeing as blacks have all the civil rights of whites plus more in the United States? They have affirmative action, lots and lots of it. But we still call them civil rights leaders. They just don't, they don't like Portland because it is just too white. A white-topia, as some have dubbed it. And we learned from the Associated Press that cancel culture, a thing? Is it a thing? Apparently, the majority opinion there is that it is not, in fact, a thing. It is simply just desserts for evil white people. This is from Hillel, Italy. Interesting name. So you probably read a lot about cancel culture, or know about a new poll that shows a plurality of Americans disapproving of it. Or you may have heard about a letter in Harper's Magazine condemning censorship and intolerance. But can you say exactly what cancel culture is? Some takes. It seems like a buzzword that creates more confusion than clarity, says the author and journalist George Packer, who calls it a mechanism where a chorus of voices amplified on social media tries to silence a point of view that they find offensive by trying to damage or destroy the reputation of the person who has given offense. And now a black woman and an academic and a PhD, she steps in, and she is author, educator, and sociologist Tressie McMillan Cottom. Not Cotton, but Cottom. I don't think it's real, but there are reasonable people who believe in it. From my perspective, accountability has always existed, But some people are being held accountable in ways that aren't new to them. We didn't talk about cancel culture when someone was charged with a crime and had to stay in jail because they couldn't afford the bail. Oh, so you're comparing someone who says it's okay to be white or all lives matter with someone, say, who has shot someone else or robbed someone else or some such? I guess they must be equivalent crimes. Oh, and this is a person that I didn't know still existed. Letty Cotton Apograbin, the author, activist, and founding editor of Ms. Magazine. Cancel culture tacitly attempts to disable the ability of a person with whom you agree to ever again be taken seriously as a writer, editor, speaker, activist, intellectual, or in the extreme, to be hired or employed in their field of work. It means different things to different people, says Ben Wisner, director of the ACLU's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project. You remember when the ACLU used to stand up for free speech? A Political Morning Consult poll released last week shows 44% of Americans disapprove of it, 32% approve, and the remaining 24% had no opinion or didn't know what it was. For some, cancel culture is the coming of the thought police. This has been going on since the 1980s. And I guess that the media must be genuinely frightened if they're now, for the first time, openly acknowledging that it exists. Debates can be circular and confusing with those objecting to intolerance, sometimes openly uncomfortable with those who don't share their views. A few weeks ago, more than 100 artists and thinkers endorsed a letter co-written by Packer and published by Harper's. It warned against a new set of moral attitudes and political commitments that tend to weaken our norms of open debate and toleration of differences in favor of ideological conformity. The letter drew signatories from many backgrounds and political points of view, ranging from the far-left Noam Chomsky to the conservative David Frum. It was a starting point for contradiction. The writer and trans activist Jennifer Finney Boylan, who signed the letter, quickly disowned it because she did not know who else had attached their names. Other endorsers included Salman Rushdie, yes, we know who he is, and Thomas Chatterton Williams said that he'd thrown out Barry Weiss because for being someone who criticized Barry Weiss at his French pied-à-terre. A correspondent of mine said, I'd like to hear the non-false version of that story. The only speech these powerful people seem to care about is their own, the author and feminist Jessica Valenti wrote in response to the Harper's letter. Jessica Valenti is surely one of the most obnoxious and least valuable person in the entire United States of America. The fact that feminists are being silenced by transsexuals doesn't seem to be something that bothers her very much. Let's see. Cancel culture is certainly not about free speech, says Valenti. After all, an arrested journalist is never referred to as canceled. Which arrested journalist is she speaking about? Nor is a woman who has been frozen out of an industry about complaining about sexual harassment. Is that what's been going on in Hollywood in the last few years? Canceled is a label we all understand to mean a powerful person who's been held to account. Like that story, the famous story of the woman who was getting on an airplane and she made some sort of joke about AIDS. And after the airplane landed, she found out that she was fired from her job and was, eventually made a social leper. Jessica Valenti, of course, is lying to you because there's all sorts of relative nobodies who have been canceled. And then they bring up Colin Kaepernick as a fellow who's been canceled, which is absolutely hilarious. Although, to their credit, AP notes that he has appeared in Nike advertisements, been honored by the ACLU and Amnesty International, and reached an agreement with the Walt Disney Company for a series about his life. Is there a lot of dramatic incident in Colin Kaepernick's life? Let's see. Gets adopted by a white family. Half white, half black. Shows talent in football. Becomes a football player. Makes a spectacle of himself after hooking up with a Muslim woman. His last 2 years as a quarterback, crummy in the extreme. What quarterback ratings below 60, barely above 50? No one signs him. becomes a martyr, becomes rich. I think you could say that Trump's rhetoric has had a boomerang effect on the rest of our society, said PEN America CEO Suzanne Nossel. Remember when PEN America used to speak up for free speech? She addresses free expression in her book Dare to Speak Out, which comes out next week. People on the left feel they can get away with anything, so they do all they can to contain it elsewhere. Oh, that he can get away with anything. This is again a lie. Donald Trump is not getting away with everything. Donald Trump is constrained at every step along the way. Hang on. This is intensely frustrating. I wanted to say something about this Tressie Cottom. Strange name. Strange woman. She is now apparently a very significant figure in the United States. And I wouldn't go so far to say that it was entirely because she was black, but of course that doesn't hurt. She's an American writer, sociologist, and professor. She's currently an associate professor at the University of North Carolina and Chapel Hill School of Information and Library Science. She is, okay, let's see, she's written a bunch of books, and of course she has, her writing has appeared in exactly the sort of publications that you would expect: the Atlantic Slate, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and she does a podcast with Roxane Gay called Here to Slay. The podcast that tips the scales, one could say. Roxane Gay, of course, is the author of a memoir which is called Hungry. Let's see. She writes from the analytical perspective of intersectionality. I know what those words mean, but I don't know what that sentence is supposed to mean. The analytical perspective of intersectionality. Her essays have advocated for reparations to African Americans, identified racism rather than political correctness as the real threat to university campus life, and suggested that black girls are treated as more adult than white girls. I also don't know what that means either. McMillan Cottom's book Thick and Other Essays was published by the New Press in 2019. John Warner, writing for the Chicago Tribune, described Thick as the story of Cotton's life, but also as a kind of manifesto. The book draws on examples from McMillan Cotton's own life, including sexual abuse, divorce, and the death of a child, to discuss broader issues in race, beauty, and education, such as why black women can never be seen as beautiful. That's not what the fashion industry is trying to tell us. That's certainly not what Calvin Klein is trying to tell us with this enormous, 250-pound black woman that they're using as a fashion model now. Why universities prefer African students to African American students, and how assumptions about wealth, competence, and pain undermine black women's efforts to achieve health and financial security. Publishers Weekly gave Thick a starred review, concluding that the collection showcases Cottom's wisdom and originality. Originality. Good one. Good one. They can actually write this. You know, there's no sense of irony that they're talking about originality here. Let's learn a little more about Thick and Other Essays. And I thought, is the word bodies going to show up a great deal? Yes. Yes, it does. In the first essay, titled Thick, Cottom describes her life story from being bow-legged to being a grad student, which she equates to being not a real person. She goes into detail about the task of fixing her feet, both literally and figuratively, as she progressed in life. As she progressed in walking normally, she also had to adjust to life as a black academic. While she was very successful as a grad student, she became uneasy about how best to make a name for herself as being known solely as the grad student. Felt impersonal and isolating, and navigating life as a young academic of color was tricky, but she had to find a place for her work and a place in which her voice could thrive. She notes the rigor in which the black woman works. oftentimes just to make ends meet, and notes that while she worked her as a grad student and young academic, she often worked the wrong way. Okay, so Barack Obama becomes president, and according to this woman, whites don't get any credit for that. The whites cherished that Obama's faith in racial progress and race relations, and they voted for him because they saw their idyllic selves mirrored in him, and also he afforded them the chance to romanticize this notion of progress while having to actually work for it at all, which is why some of the same whites who voted for him voted for President Donald Trump. Yep. She writes about body image, and I guess she is she's a big woman. And I guess it was white people that decided that her being a big woman makes her unattractive. Let's see. In an interview, she said there's this category out there that we think of as thick, but there's also, one of the plays in the title essay is that idea that I also wanted to connect how we move through the world physically as women, with Black women's bodies in this world, and connect that to our political thought and the way that we think and approach the world. I know this may be a surprise to Professor Tressie McMillan Cottom, but all thought is connected to corporeal entities. That is to say, we all have bodies. I know that Black women's bodies are particularly cherished these days. But no, we all have bodies, and we all have to, there are various struggles associated with them. And there are lots of thick white women too, and they are not regarded as attractive. But I don't know, that's just a part of the cross that they bear. You know, our bodies are, our bodies, the Garden of Eden. We get old, we get sick. We all die. And it's the same for everyone. This is from the New York Post. Black Lives Matter co-founder describes herself as trained Marxist. There are 3 people who founded Black Lives Matter. They are all women, interestingly enough. It's not surprising because, of course, Black culture in the United States is matriarchal. 2 of the women are lesbians. 2 out of 3. One of them is a lesbian who is married to a male transsexual. I'm assuming that means a woman who became a man, although I can't state that to a certainty. Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors said in a newly surfaced video from 2015 that she and her fellow organizers are trained Marxists, making clear their movement's ideological foundation. Cullors, 36, was the protege of Eric Mann, former agitator of the Weather Underground domestic terror organization, and spent years absorbing the Marxist-Leninist ideology that shaped her worldview, Breitbart News reported. The first thing I think is that you actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia, in particular, are trained organizers, she said, referring to BLM co-founder Alicia Garza. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. Another PhD candidate, perhaps. And I think that what we really tried to do is to build a movement that could be utilized by many, many Black folk. While promoting her book, When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir in 2018, she described her introduction to and support for Marxist ideology. She described to Democracy Now! That she became a trained organizer with the Labor Community Strategy Center, which she called her first political home under the direct mentorship of Mann, its director. The center, which describes its philosophy as an urban experiment, uses grassroots organization to focus on Black and Latino communities with deep historical ties to the long history of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, pro-communist resistance to the U.S. empire. It also expresses its appreciation for the work of U.S. Communist Party, especially Black communists, as well as support for the great work of the Black Panther Party, the American Indian Movement, Young Lords, Brown Berets, and the other great revolutionary rainbow experiments of the 1970s. So, give me a second here. I finally got my trackball to work. So there's a woman called Sarah Nadav, and what does she do? She is a behavioral economist, a fintech entrepreneur, a startup advisor at Google, at Techstars, at WEF Expert Network. Meet Alec Berenson, a troll of epic proportions, took screenshots of my tweets and posted them on his feed because I dared to set my kids up to camp in our yard with a pool, fan, and Wi-Fi instead of having them quarantine inside. Now I'm being hammered with abusive comments. Berenson had tweeted, "Meet Sarah Nadav. Sarah makes her kids, 13 and 15, sleep, eat, and urinate outside. Their crime? They saw their aunt, a swim teacher who had a student age 5 with SARS-CoV-2. Now Sarah says they were potentially exposed and a risk to her. I wish I were making this up." Again, women on social media. Sarah Nadav tweeted this information about her own children. And I shouldn't think that Nadav is a very common name. That is to say that her children are easily exposed. So she divulges all this embarrassing stuff about them to the world, and she is utterly shocked when people actually pay attention or that they're critical of what she has done, because she expected commendation for this, and I suppose she got some of that, but she got more too, and that is simply that's not on. It's not on. How dare people? How dare people criticize her? Well, you know, there's a way around this, which is don't report this sort of thing in public, because there's always the possibility that people are going to disagree with you, that you're going to be mocked. And again, women like Sarah Nadav, they don't understand it. This just seems inexplicable to them. My kids aren't sick. They were just exposed. I am monitoring them to see if they get symptoms, and then we'll work out something else, she wrote. And she printed pictures of their little tent city out there. I suppose at the age of 13 and 15, this might be amusing to them for a while. I suppose they get sick of it soon enough. Someone responded to her, "Us as adults would quarantine, no doubt, but if my kids were exposed, I would go through it with them, even if I get infected. This is just plain selfish. Plus, we're in the middle of summer. Don't tell me you care about them, because this shows that you care only about yourself." And she responded, "You know, as a parent, you have an obligation to stay healthy for them. They might get a light case, but you might die. I made this decision because my kids need me to stay well for them." I don't know about that. If it turns out that they can, make do in the backyard by themselves, they might begin to wonder just how much they need mom. Particularly, she seems to be far more interested in her own health than the health of her children. Toby Young in Lockdown Skeptics, he notes that Matt Hancock has written an article in the Telegraph in which he warns people who are morbidly obese and that they are at higher risk of dying from COVID-19. Young comments, "How great is the risk of dying from coronavirus if you're a fatty? According to the latest ONS infection survey data, about 1 in 2,300 people had COVID-19 in England in the week of July the 6th to 12th. Now, that's not very reliable because the false positive rate for the antigen test could easily be 1 in 2,300. So to confirm this, the ONS would need to retest anyone testing positive to confirm the result, which it hasn't done, obviously." Well, so he goes through the numbers. If you're an Englishman, your chances of contracting the virus over the course of the next 12 months is 633,000 in 56 million, or 1.13%. So what are your chances of dying from COVID-19? If you're unlucky enough to get it, it varies with age, obviously, but let's assume an infection fatality rate of 0.26%, the last but one CDC estimate, which I suspect was a little high. Again, benefit of the doubt. That means the average chance of an Englishman catching and then succumbing to the virus is around 0.0029%. Let's add Matt Hancock's 25%, the increase in your chances of catching COVID-19 and dying if you have a body mass index of between 30 and 35, and it comes to 0.0036%, or 1 in roughly 28,000. That's remarkably similar to your chances of dying in a road traffic accident in the UK, and remember, that's all ages. So if you just look at under 65s, your chances of dying from COVID-19 are far, far lower than your chances of dying in a road traffic accident, even if you're morbidly obese. The schools. It was inevitable. The General Secretary of the National Union of Bedwetters, the Teachers Union, has called for face coverings to be mandatory in schools and college. Teachers and other staff working in schools also want to be assured that when they return to the workplace in September, they will be afforded the same level of protection as other workers, and that the guidance for schools will be brought into line with the guidance for other workplaces. Mr. Roach, the General Secretary of the Teachers Union, noted that government advice means children over the age of 11 are required to wear coverings when they visit a range of facilities, such as shops and banks. He said, so there's a strong argument that face masks should also be made compulsory for children when they return to secondary schools in September. Young comments, the teaching unions must know that only 4 children under the age of 15 have died from COVID-19 in the whole of the UK, and no one has been able to document a single case of a child infecting adult anywhere in the world. So why the insistence of face nappies? I can only assume that is to make it even harder for schools to reopen in September so the union's due-paying members can extend their 6-month holiday. Track and trace program is unlawful. Yeah. The government has spent a fortune, not a small fortune, but a large fortune on this, and it's been an absolute fiasco. He provides a cutout and keep mask exempt card under the aegis of disability travel support. There's a picture of a mask. I have a reasonable excuse for not wearing a face covering. Thank you for understanding. I like the thank you. It reminds me, you remember, when was this? The 1970s, when these signs, thank you for not smoking, began to appear? Oh, I see. We're going to be polite about this. We're going to simply forbid it. But there's a pretense of being nice. I liked what Fran Lebowitz how she responded to this. She said, don't thank me because I'm not going to not smoke. Beer sales rose in lockdown, and yet we drank less. Contrary to popular myth, alcohol consumption actually declined during lockdown. Seems counterintuitive. I noticed that, back in March, say, I noticed that people were hoarding alcohol, that people would go into liquor stores and they would buy 12 bottles of wine and or spirits. I suppose the assumption was that everything was going to close down. Remember the days when we were all terrified that we were going to run out of toilet paper and paper towels, so everyone started hoarding that? Good times, weren't they? So I suppose that people have, cupboards full of alcohol, just in case the second surge or the third surge or whatever surge we're up to now, go surge. Yeah, just in case that comes back with a vengeance. It's too funny. Actually, it's not funny at all. It's absolutely exacerbating. Not exacerbating. Mike Rowe. He is a famous TV star. He does shows about people's work, I understand. I'm not really familiar with him, except that I've seen him advertise pickup trucks. He has a Facebook post on July the 22nd, and he's asked about infection rates spiking. What does he think? And he responds, on March the 15th, the day after my part of the country was locked down, I posted a link to an interview with Dr. Michael Osterholm. I'm posting it again because I believe you and everyone else in the country would benefit from listening carefully to what he has to say. Dr. Osterholm is the Director of Infectious Disease Research and Policy. This is the same epidemiologist who 10 years ago predicted a coronavirus would come from China and turn our country upside down. In his book, Deadliest Enemies, he anticipated the utterly irresponsible way in which the media would report on the situation, the completely opportunistic and shamelessly political way our leaders would likely react, and the unprecedented chaos and confusion that would arise from all the mixed messages from the medical community. His resume is unexampled, and his analysis of the situation is the most logical and persuasive of any I've heard so far. He is also the only expert I know of who hasn't walked back his numbers, reconsidered his position, or moved the goalposts with regard to what we must do, what we can do, and what he expects to happen next. I say all of this because Dr. Osterholm publicly predicted in early March that we could conservatively see over 100 million COVID cases in this country, that would be America, with a very strong possibility of 480,000 fatalities, even if we successfully flattened the curve. And here we get into the question of large numbers. And it turns out that the overwhelming majority of people, as I've pointed out many times, don't seem to be able to understand any number larger than, say, 1,000. Thus, for the last 3 months, I've been operating for the assumption that this is a year-round virus that's eventually going to infect 100 million people and kill roughly 0.5% of those infected conservatively. I've accepted those numbers. Unfortunately, millions of others have not. Many people have no sense of where this is headed, and I understand why. They have been betrayed by hysterical media that insists on covering each new reported case as if it were the first case. Every headline today drips with dread as the next doomed hotspot approaches the next grim milestone. And so, for a lot of people, every day is Groundhog Day. Fact is, we the people can accept almost anything if we're given the facts and enough time to evaluate the risk and make our own decisions. Last year in this country, there were 6 million traffic accidents and 36,000 fatalities. Tragic, for sure. But imagine for a moment if no one had ever died from a car accident. Imagine if this year America endured 6 million traffic accidents and 36,000 fatalities for the first time ever. Now, imagine if these accidents and fatalities, over 16,090 per day respectively, imagine if they were reported upon like every new instance of COVID. What would that do to our willingness to drive? For a while, I suspect it would keep us all off the roads, right? I mean, 6 million accidents out of the blue is a lot to process, and 36,000 deaths is scary, especially if you don't know how high that number could get. It would take us a while to access the risk before we blindly hopped into our cars again. Eventually, though, after getting some context and perspective, we'd be able to evaluate the relative danger of operating a motor vehicle. Then we could decide for ourselves when to drive, and how much to drive. And so we do. Risk. Yes, this is the best thing that I've seen yet on the subject of risk in COVID-19. Oh, I mentioned March, the Red Menace back in March. Remember when we were told that the COVID-19 virus could live on metal surfaces for 9 days? Remember when we were told that? Oh, and everyone was expected to wash their hands 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times a day. Well, as I said at the time, if COVID-19 can exist and infect people for 9 days on metal surfaces, everyone in North America is going to get COVID-19. It's that simple. In the Atlantic, of all pages, Derek Thompson writes, as COVID-19 summer surge sweeps the country, deep cleans are all the rage. National restaurants such as Applebee's are deputizing sanitation czars to oversee the constant scrubbing of window ledges, menus, and high chairs. The gym chain Planet Fitness is boasting in ads that there's no surface we won't sanitize, no machine we won't scrub. New York City is shutting down its subway system every night for the first time in its 116-year history to blast the seats, walls, and poles with a variety of antiseptic weaponry, including electrostatic disinfectant sprays. And in Wauchula, Florida, the local government gave one resident permission to spray the town with hydrogen peroxide as he saw fit. I think every city in the damned United States need to be doing it, he said. To some American companies and Florida men, COVID-19 is apparently a war that will be won through antimicrobial testing and to ensure that pathogens are banished from every square inch of America's surface area. But what if this is all just a huge waste of time? In May, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated its guidelines to clarify that while COVID-19 spreads easily among speakers and sneezers in close encounters, touching a surface isn't thought to be the main way the virus spreads. Other scientists have reached a more forceful conclusion. Surface transmission of COVID-19 is not justified by all the science Emmanuel Goldman, a microbiology professor at Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, told me. He also emphasized the primacy of airborne, person-to-person transmission. There is a historical echo here. After 9/11, physical security became a national obsession, especially in airports, where the Transportation Security Administration patted down the crotches of innumerable grandmothers for possible explosives. My colleague Jim Fallows repeatedly referred to this wasteful bonanza as security theater. COVID-19 has reawakened America's spirit of misdirected anxiety, inspiring businesses and families to obsess over risk reduction rituals that make us feel safer, but don't actually do much to reduce risk. Even as more dangerous activities are still alive, this is hygiene theater. Oh, by the way, I'm going to mention something disgusting now. So, I don't know, you can mute this for about a minute or so. The British Columbia government, Ministry of Health, issued guidelines regarding sexual activity during the Red Menace and actually recommended glory holes as being superior to, normal people's sex. Yeah, they actually did this. I don't know whether it was some sort of rogue homosexual at the agency or someone thought this was a good laugh. But remember the moral inversion that I was talking about at the beginning of the show? We learned during the AIDS epidemic that homosexuals were the saints among us. Do you remember that? This poor people infected were given AZT, which is a drug that killed all of them. And so you remember if you're old enough, you'll remember seeing them on television in this kind of Christ-like pose, wasted away on hospital beds, sweating profusely with long mustache and beard and matted long hair, arms like this. But now apparently they are showing the way again because they are our moral exemplars. Let's go to the chat. Brandon Smith says, fear of death is the glue that holds global tyranny together. I don't know. Is it fear of death? It may be a fear of peer pressure, as Christopher Lash talks about, the fear of being out of step, the loss of personal authenticity. It's odd to me that authenticity is associated these days with behaviors which are uniform, such as everyone getting a tattoo, such as men, shaving their heads when they don't need to, piercings in the head, that sort of thing. People making themselves look like everyone else. Sure, because there's a barrier between people makes sense, says Metal Mike. Why don't they just get on with it and start sacrificing babies? Yeah, I don't know. We may get there soon. I see that the advocates of euthanasia, or physician-assisted murder, as I call it, are outraged because new legislation from the federal government will not allow doctors to kill people suffering solely from mental illnesses, because they're judged, this is often a temporary situation which can be treated. But it's clear that what we're looking at here is a culling of the weak, the lame, and the halt. We saw it with old people in their homes with COVID-19. We're seeing it with the calls for all drugs to be decriminalized. Because I guess, when these people die of fentanyl overdoses, I mean, they're discovered dead, so the medical costs are quite low. These people were a drain on society in many ways, so clearly they're better off dead. And I guess our governments have decided, or on the verge of deciding, that we're going to help them along. Yes, what brave new world. I like Mike Rowe. Is it Rowe? Or I assume it's Rowe, says DB Cooper. I've seen him interviewed. He seems like quite a reasonable person. Claire Koss says, anyone who hoarded booze must have drunk it all by now. Would Kevin like to wear his mask for us? I do not have a mask, and I'm not going to wear a mask. Not going to happen. Walrus Libertarian says, welfare killed the black family. They say, well, families that receive welfare are not allowed to have man in the house, which is accentuated the trend, which already existed towards matriarchy. Use your phone's hopefully 4G connection. Okay, I don't know that I have 4G actually, and I have a very, very basic plan because I was paying about $60 a month, and I was not using the data. So I switched to a cheaper plan, and I found that my phone company just took the data, and it was quite a few gigabytes too. They just took it from me. Is black culture really matriarchal, though? It seems very masculine. It's masculine in a pointless way. It's not masculine in the sense of men protecting their wives or protecting their children. It's masculine in the sense of killing other men over trifles. Let's see. Use your phone's okay. Again with the phone network. I'll look into this. Okay. I'll look into this. That's all I can promise. Bae Buchanan, who is formerly the Treasurer of the United States and is one of Pat Buchanan's sisters, has a piece in CNS News. Fox News host Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity shared an awkward moment Tuesday night. In the transition between the two primetime shows, Hannity appeared to take issue with Tucker's scathing segment on Amazon tycoon Jeff Bezos gaining $13 billion in one day. People can make money, Hannity said. They provide goods and services people want, need, and desire. That's America. It's called freedom, capitalism, and as long as it's honest, right? If you've seen that video clip, you will see the look that Tucker Carlson gives Hannity after his fatuous summing up of what America means. America means Amazon selling everything to terrified people locked into their homes. Hannity later clarified that his soliloquy to Bezos' billions was not aimed at Tucker, but was rather a defense of honest capitalism. Yet this begs the question, is Amazon honest capitalism? The answer is no. Amazon operates multiple monopolies and unfairly stifles competition. It uses its incredible power to crush smaller companies and ensure they can never compete against the tech giant. It also censors conservatives and relies on Chinese child labor. This is not the free market competition conservatives should support. During the coronavirus epidemic, Amazon claimed it prioritized essential products on its various services. Unsurprisingly, the critical products Amazon prioritized happened to be Amazon's own. Amazon products were advertised with faster delivery times, while the quicker delivery times of third-party sellers were hidden. Bezos' behemoth claims that this was an honest mistake caused by its algorithms, but isn't it funny this mistake benefited Amazon? Amazon Prime is the second largest video streaming service in the world, and Amazon Fire is in fierce competition to be the #1 streaming stick service in America. It's estimated that 57% of the American streaming stick market is controlled by Amazon. Amazon Fire, despite being one of the largest services, blocks Warner Media's HBO Max and NBC Universal's Peacock from its platform. According to Variety, Amazon blocks these services because they compete with Prime. This shows Amazon does not want to be solely a distributor, and only wants to favor its own services. These cases demonstrate how Amazon weaponizes its monopoly power to crush smaller competitors. A streaming platform can't compete against Prime if it isn't available on the most popular streaming stick service in America. Companies that sell essential goods can't compete against Amazon when Amazon only prominently features faster delivery times for its own products. Competition is crucial to honest capitalism, but Bezos doesn't seem interested in this concept. Conservatives should particularly worry about the tech behemoth censoring right-leaning viewpoints and media. Amazon's Twitch banned Donald Trump, the president of the United States, from its platform in June over hateful conduct. Twitch claimed Trump's famous 2015 comments about illegal immigrant rapists and his remarks about tough hombre criminals at his June Tulsa rally constituted hateful conduct. This justification is ridiculous and amounts to viewpoint discrimination against millions of conservatives. Amazon Prime censored the popular documentary Hoaxed in April. The documentary was made by right-wing personality Mike Cernovich and criticized the mainstream media. Hoaxed was in Prime's top 50 documentaries prior to its removal. It's not a huge mystery why Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, may not want to feature a documentary that skewers the media from a right-wing perspective. Perhaps most disturbingly, Amazon profits from Chinese supply chain factories, which reportedly rely on forced labor. Many of these slaves are Uyghurs and other persecuted minorities. A 2019 investigation revealed that Amazon's Echo and Kindle were produced by Chinese school children working overnight. Is it honest capitalism to utilize child and slave labor to undercut American manufacturers who pay their workers a living wage? No conservatives opposed to people making a lot of money the honest way. American prosperity is due to the entrepreneurship and free market competition of its citizens. Yet we should question when one man amasses so much wealth and power with unfair business practices. Monopolies built on forced labor do not represent the American way. I don't know, that's the old view. I don't know to what extent it is the new view. I don't think that it's the Institute of the Cato Institute or any of the rest of the coctopus. There's a piece here on Front Page Mag about Colin Flaherty, who has been banned by pretty much everyone. He's written a book called Don't Make the Black Kids Angry. Years ago, it was Flaherty's determination and investigative powers that resulted in the release from jail of a black man who'd been wrongly arrested and incarcerated for having allegedly beaten the white woman who he had been seeing. The latter, as it turned out, attempted to frame her ex. NPR is among the left-leaning organizations that lavish praise on Flaherty. His first book on the topic of black criminality, White Girl Bleed a Lot, elicited universal praise from such conservative luminaries as Thomas Sowell, Jesse Lee Patterson, Alan West, and many others. And he organized a march for victims of violence in the United States. And according to this report, it was quite popular. And yes, it's good to see. It's good to see, but I don't know. I get a certain feeling of DR3 from this. Look, everybody knows, even black people know that they are the greatest victims of black violence. Jesse Jackson said, what, about 20 years ago? He said, when I'm walking alone at night and I hear people behind me and I look back and I see that it's white people and not black people, I feel relieved. I don't know whether Jesse Jackson would ever say that now, but that's what he said at the time. Let's talk about Meghan Mertz, the Duchess of Sussex. She's a selfless woman. She lives for other people. She lives for charity. She lives for justice and reconciliation, and yet she has suffered so very much because of this. She came to the rescue of the British royal family, and yet she has been shamefully hounded out of Britain and forced to reside in a 60-room mansion in Los Angeles. But there is a new book about the selfless Meghan Mertz and her hapless husband, Prince Harry, the ginger waster. This is from the Daily Beast. When she and Prince Harry officially quit the royal family in March, Meghan Mertz reportedly tearfully told a friend, "I gave up my entire life for this family. I was willing to do whatever it takes, but here we are. It's very sad. The powers of the institution are unfortunately greater than me." She is also reported to have said she likened tabloid criticism to death by 1,000 cuts. I very much doubt that Meghan Mertz would be familiar with the phrase death by 1,000 cuts, but never mind that. Meanwhile, Prince Harry felt at once used for their popularity, hounded by the press because of the public's fascination with this new breed of royal couple, and disparaged back within the institution's walls for being too sensitive and outspoken. He and Meghan didn't want to walk away from the monarchy, rather they wanted to find a happy place within it. The explosive details of Harry and Meghan's departure from the royal family are revealed in the first extract from the tell-all biography, Finding Freedom, Harry and Meghan and the Making of a Modern Royal Family by Omid Scobie and Carolyn Durand, which has been published by the Times of London. The extract was published the day after Harry and Meghan launched a new lawsuit over an alleged paparazzi intrusion at their home in Los Angeles, in which photographs were taken of their son, Archie. She complained when she was on Vancouver Island, just up the road from me, that the terrible effrontery and intrusion of the paparazzi, which is why she posed for photographs for them, including one particularly awkward photograph when she was carrying this baby, barely more than a newborn, while holding two dogs on a leash at the same time, which struck me as being, well, a little dangerous, actually. She has never met a camera that she doesn't like. She reportedly spends hours every day fussing with her hair, straightening it. But I gather that's not unusual amongst her class. I'm told that Jennifer Aniston spends 6 hours every day on various beauty and fitness treatments. Archie is, already the most photographed child in the world. The book says that Harry felt unprotected by his family. You mean when unprotected? When for years he was stumbling out of nightclubs at 3 o'clock in the morning, or being photographed nude at public swimming pools, or dressing up as a Nazi? Yes, fundamentally, Harry wanted out. A source close to the couple revealed. I love that source close to the couple. This is a style of writing that Private Eye immortalized years ago as being by the journalist Sylvie Crin, after the shampoo. Yes, the breathless style. Harry likened the negotiations around his and Meghan's royal exit to standing in front of a firing squad. Really? Does he know that a firing squad ends up with people being fatally shot to death? He was in the military. I suppose he would know this. At one point, as Harry scrolled through negative comments online, this is clearly a man with not much going on in his life. Let's go, to the Daily Mail site and find out how many people don't like me. Okay. He is reported to have said, "It's a sick part of society we live in today, and no one is doing anything about it. Where's the positivity? Why is everyone so miserable and angry?" Ever since Harry hooked up with Meghan, he has looked positively miserable in almost every single one of his public appearances. After their final royal engagement, the book reveals Meghan got the first flight back to Canada Meg just wanted to get home. A friend said, well, Canada is not her home. Los Angeles is her home. But I suppose she has now become a citoyenne du monde, citizen of the world. She was emotionally bruised and exhausted. At that point, she couldn't imagine wanting to set a foot back into anything royal again. Yeah, so how are you going to make your money then, Meghan? Because you were a B-list actress, maybe a C-plus list actress, and you're not going to be able to sell all this tat based on your own name. It's the Sussex name. And apparently you've been told by the Queen that you can't use the Sussex name anymore. Yeah, so essentially what this comes down to is the B-list actress cries out in pain as she attacks Britain. Oh, let's get into race here. What? While Saturday's excerpt, more planned for Sunday and Monday, does not contain any references to long-rumored allegations of racism within the palace experienced by Meghan. In a separate interview with The Times, Scobie, who is of Iranian and British heritage, said she was a biracial woman stepping into the House of Windsor that was going to ruffle feathers. We only need look at the difficult Duchess narrative. What is difficult? Difficult is pushy, aggressive. It's all the things that we throw on black women as a society, regardless of what their actual personality is. Well, the Duchess of Windsor, as she became, was not a black or biracial woman. She was seen as pushy and aggressive, and she was much hated in Britain for decades after her husband abdicated. I could point out that the Princess of Wales was also greatly hated. In fact, Oberyn Waugh, who quite fell for her, as we all did when she was first announced to the public, later grew tired of her antics and warned that it seemed likely that the British public would grow tired of her antics too and would destroy what he referred to as Princess Monster. I don't really know that this has anything to do with race, but you know that you're in a very weak position when you're forced to drag that out. This is really the best woman that Harry could find. I mean, he was always being associated with bimbos, you know. Some of these women were good looking. Obviously, he didn't want to go down the route of his brother and pick somebody respectable, as Prince William did. I don't know. Maybe he resembles his father Charles in that regard, because Charles made a very foolish marriage, and he was rather forced into this position because he clearly did not want to get married, and he put off getting married for decades, with the results that we all know. This was so, the affair of the Princess of Wales was so damaging to him that there continues to remain doubt as to whether he'll ever be allowed to become king. There's something off about him, something definitely weird about him. Let's see, we're getting near the end of the show here, and I do apologize again for audiovisual problems. I'll see what I can do tomorrow to adjust this. Barbara Kay, I'm sure many Canadians are familiar with her journalism. She is a generally sensible old Jewish woman who has written for the National Post for quite a few years, and her son, Jonathan Kay, who I believe is a member of the intellectual dark web, was associated with the Post for many years as well. She announced on Facebook that she has resigned from the National Post because basically editors were buggering her copy about and telling her not to write this, not to write that. Oh, no, you want to approach this in a different way. When is my piece going to appear? Well, we can't tell you. That sort of thing. She writes, even when my columns appear in the National Post without any kind of delay or objection, I feel a lingering worry that some stray word or phrase will cause an editor to suffer blowback. There's nothing the Canadian media loves more than stories about bitter infighting within its own ranks. And I wish I had a shocking tale of censorship or workplace bullying to supply to those media critics who trade on schadenfreude. Alas, I don't. In fact, I continue to respect and appreciate the Post editors who've worked with me over the years, but the severe pressures they now experience no longer can be compartmentalized within their managerial sphere. They have spilled out into their relationship with their columnists, spoiling the weekly rights of editorial collaboration that were once the great joys of this job. So it would seem that what's going on at the National Post is similar to what's going on at the New York Times and other places, that you have the woke youngsters who are causing trouble, making threats, and the middle-aged men and women who are in charge are terrified of them, which is very, very sad. I generally agreed with what Barbara Kay had to say, and it's a shame to see her go. I'll leave this tomorrow, this shameful column by someone named Ushnish Sengupta in the Toronto Star. BLM protesters justified in tarnishing colonial statues, says this immigrant from India. I wanted to speak briefly about one of my favorite musicians who died 2 years ago. His name was Peter Green. Died at the age of 73. Peter Green was a vocalist, guitarist, and songwriter who founded the group Fleetwood Mac. He's of a particular generation of British blues musicians, and in retrospect, it seems a very odd story that you have a Jewish boy from Bethnal Green in London called Peter Greenbaum, who decides that he's going to become the best blues player in the world, and he does. Peter Green replaced Eric Clapton in John Mayall's band, and of course it was John Mayall's band, the Blues Breakers, that made Eric Clapton famous with the famous Beano album, as they call it. And Mike Vernon, who was a staff producer at Decca Records, he produced all of those bands. Savoy Brown, 10 years after Fleetwood Mac. The list goes on and on. He produced David Bowie's first record as well. So the story goes like this. As the band walked into the studio, I noticed an amplifier which I never saw before. So I said to John Mayall, "Where's Eric Clapton?" Mayall answered, "He's not with us anymore. He left us a few weeks ago." I was in a state of shock, but Mayall said, "Don't worry, we got someone better." I said, "Wait a minute, hang on a second. This is ridiculous. You've got someone better than Eric Clapton?" John said, "He might not be better now, but you wait. In a couple of years, he's going to be the best." Then he introduced me to Peter Green. So he was the star of the John Mayall album, The Hard Road, in 1967, and then he decided he wanted to start his own band with John McVie on bass and Mick Fleetwood on drums, and this is what happened. Eventually, Fleetwood Mac had a triple guitar lineup of Peter Green and Danny Kerwin and Jeremy Spencer, and it's quite a remarkable story because they had three guitarists and all three of them went mad. And two of them, Peter Green and Danny Kerwin, were homeless for many years, wandering the streets, sleeping rough, that sort of thing. Jeremy Spencer quit the band in the early 1970s to join the pedophilic cult, the Children of God. Green began with Fleetwood Mac singing songs that were not his own. But then he revealed himself very quickly to be an outstanding songwriter, and very, very successful in Britain too. I suppose his most famous song is Black Magic Woman because of the cover by Santana, but he had a #1 hit with an instrumental in 1968 called Albatross. His song Man of the World, a very melancholy song, was in the top 10, as well as Oh Well. And the final song that he recorded with Fleetwood Mac is called Green Manalishi, and it's about the devil. It's generally LSD, which is blamed for Green's insanity, but I suspect that it's just as much marijuana as anything else, because like Nick Drake, Green had been a prodigious consumer of marijuana. In 1970, he was, I don't know, invited to or kidnapped by a hippie commune in Germany, where he took many, many, many doses of LSD. But as I say, his instability had been demonstrated before then. He grew his hair very long, and he grew a long beard, and he began appearing on stage wearing kaftans and sporting a long pectoral cross. And he grew to hate the idea of making money, such that there's a story, which may or may not be apocryphal, that he allegedly attacked the band's accountant or the manager because this person insisted on sending royalty checks to him. Danny Kerwin kept the band going after Peter Green left, and Danny Kerwin went nuts himself. It's a very, very sad story. And of course, people talk about Fleetwood Mac now, and they mean, the SoCal soft rock band. The Peter Green stuff it's unique, and it is outstanding. I recommend an album called The Best of Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. I would also very much recommend a 3-party set called Live at the Boston Tea Party, which was recorded in 1970, and it shows Peter Green and Danny Kerwin to be perhaps the most outstanding dual guitar duo in rock history. It's tremendously exciting stuff. Peter Green made a comeback in later years. He was much altered. He was completely bald on top, and he had this big belly. And but he got back to making music, and I wanted to talk about him briefly because his music meant so very much to me. And I do dearly hope that he has found the peace that he sought for in vain for so long. So that's it for the show today. Once again, apologies for technical difficulties. And I'll look up all the comments on 3G and 4G and all the rest of it. Yeah, Bob Welch stepped into Fleetwood Mac solo career after faltered, committed suicide a few years ago. Yeah, it doesn't end well for a lot of these people. I saw there's a documentary that was made 2 years ago about the band XTC called This Is Pop, which I saw yesterday. It was made for Sky in Britain, and it's on some channel here called Crave. It's really quite good, and I'm glad to see that Andy has patched it up with Colin Moulding and with Dave Gregory, or so it would seem. It's kind of a cautionary tale, because you might think that what being in a rock band means that, you start selling out 2,000 seaters, 5,000 seaters, and what a great life that must be, basking in the adulation. Well, XTC never made any money from playing live, which is not an unusual situation because it gets stolen. And the band's manager stopped paying value-added tax, and they got a demand for £500,000, which they didn't have. And Virgin Records had him on a rate which was so pitiful that the band went on strike. Well, like Prince did. George Michael asking to be released, and Virgin refused. Virgin was a very, very bad record company that was taken to borrowing against profits made by their bands, that is, stealing from their bands, and they got away with it. Andrew Partridge is a genuine English eccentric, and I'm glad to see that he has survived. He tells a rather harrowing story. I don't know if he's looking for sympathy about living with growing up with a mother who was clinically insane and used to throw away all of his toys. And after his mother was institutionalized, they put him on Valium starting when he was 12, and he became dependent upon it. And then a couple of decades later, I believe this was in 1982, he was on tour, a world tour, and his wife, who later left him, and he wrote some very bitter songs about her, she flushed all his Valium down the toilet, and he came home to find out there was no Valium. And, oh, okay, so I've kicked Valium cold turkey. And, well, that's not something that you want to do, apparently. I started getting intense panic attacks on a regular basis. And he developed stage fright that was so bad that he quit playing live. And that was the beginning of the end of the band, as you might imagine. I suppose if you're the Beatles or, the Beach Boys with Brian Wilson, you can get away with not playing live. It doesn't seem to work. I suppose Harry Nilsson made it work for a while in the 1970s. But if you get the chance to see this documentary, do, because it's good. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to support this live stream with a donation, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I could greatly use donations at this particular time. If you'd like to send me money directly, if you're Canadian, you can do so through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I'll leave you with this. In these times of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.